What if I told you there's a man in America who believes he's already forgiven for everything he's ever done? Not by grace, not by confession, but by money. It wasn't a courtroom confession. It was a performance. A priest took the stand, trembling, not because he feared Diddy's lawyers, but because he feared he might have helped a man turn God into a brand. He told me, the priest said, voice cracking in front of a silent room, I own my salvation. And in that moment, even the judge stopped writing. This wasn't just about crimes. This was about a man who built a private theology in the heart of Los Angeles behind tinted windows and velvet curtains, where prayers smelled like incense and power. A man who gave $25 million to churches across America, not to seek forgiveness, but to secure loyalty. And then there was the envelope, the one sealed years ago, hidden in a drawer, given to a priest, just in case. What was inside would make the courtroom gasp: a roadmap, a prophecy, a list of names and leverage. It wasn't redemption, it was strategy. What kind of person prepares a defense not for their actions, but for their damnation? This is the story of Diddy, not the mogul, not the icon, but the man who believed he could buy his way into heaven and take the keys with him. And what the priest saw behind that candlelit door may haunt him forever. Stay with me, because by the time this ends, you won't just be asking if Diddy is guilty. You'll be asking something far darker. What if he's not the only one? The priest said he expected a chapel. He imagined a modest space tucked somewhere in Beverly Hills. Maybe a quiet meditation room inside a mansion lavish. Yes, but sacred in its own way. What he didn't expect was to be ushered into what looked like a luxury nightclub dressed in stolen holiness. It was early 2013. Los Angeles was damp with post-rain chill, and the sky hung low like it knew a secret. The driver, a tall man with no expression, escorted him through a series of iron gates and black SUVs parked like statues. Mr. Combs is expecting you, he said, without turning his head. Then came the glass doors. They slid open, revealing an entry bathed in amber light and smoke, not incense from a church, but something curated, thick and sweet, designed to manipulate memory. Inside, music pulsed at the edge of hearing low, rhythmic, almost Gregorian but tinged with sub-bass. The scent of sandalwood lingered, but it was synthetic, artificial faith. The room he entered had no crucifix, no altar, just heavy velvet drapes, scattered candles on sculpted pedestals, and 3 plush velvet chairs. 2 of them faced each other. The third, curiously, was pressed against the wall, facing nothing. And there he was, Diddy, wearing all black. A chain with a diamond-encrusted cross hung loose around his neck, catching and fracturing the candlelight with every movement. Padre of the stars, he said, smiling with too many teeth, voice like silk, dragged across broken glass. I was told you understand. Discretion. Father M stood still for a moment, uncertain whether to correct the nickname or to pray. But the air in the room was not made for prayer. It was designed for performance. Diddy gestured for him to sit. Don't worry. No press here. This is between me, you, and whatever God you still trust. He spoke like a man performing a monologue, like this was a scene he had written, directed, and now starred in. Not a man seeking guidance, but a man testing it. Father M looked around, slowly absorbing the details, an antique chalice filled not with holy water, but with cognac, a black Bible, unopened, resting beneath a speaker, a painting abstract, metallic, of a silhouetted figure suspended by wires instead of a cross. Diddy noticed him looking. "Art's subjective," he murmured. "That's my remix." The priest said nothing. Not yet. He had sat with addicts, war veterans, women dying of cancer, but never with a man who turned faith into furniture. Diddy leaned back, arms wide, as if welcoming judgment or deflecting it. "They told me you help men like me," he said, "men with weight on their souls, or just too many enemies." His eyes sparkled. It was not sincerity. It was calculation. He was taking notes on the priest's reaction, measuring it like a poker player sizing up his mark. Father M finally asked, "What is it that you need from me?" Diddy's smile didn't waver. "Perspective," he said. "Not forgiveness. Just perspective." The room was quiet, except for the fake chants playing through hidden speakers. The priest sat forward. "You said you wanted spiritual counsel." "I want coverage," Diddy replied plainly. There was no shame in his voice, no tremble of guilt, just the cool, casual confidence of a man who believed in cause and effect, money in, silence out. Then he leaned closer. "Tell me this," he asked, whispering like it was a secret. "If a man does more good than bad, if he feeds cities, sends kids to school, builds churches in his mama's name, do his sins still count?" Father M didn't answer, because in that moment, he realized something terrible. This wasn't a confession. This was market research. Diddy wasn't seeking absolution. He was searching for confirmation, for a theological loophole. And Father M, sitting there in that velvet chair, felt it in his bones. He was not the priest in this room. He was the prop. Diddy had built a shrine, but it wasn't to God. It was to control. And this room, this stage dressed in sacred drag, was the altar where he rehearsed the performance of being saved. Father M would return a few more times, each visit darker than the last. But that first night, that was when he knew this wasn't a place for redemption. It was a theater for power. The third time Father M met Diddy, the night was heavier, not with rain or fog, but with something unspoken, the kind of stillness before a wildfire. The compound was quieter than usual. Fewer bodyguards, no music. Just that same amber light and the scent of luxury masked as holiness. This time, Diddy greeted him without a smile. No performative charm, no Padre of the Stars. Just a nod and a gesture toward the familiar velvet chair. He sat across from the priest, his chain absent, sleeves rolled, hands clasped like a man deep in thought, or pretending to be. He stared at a candle between them, then exhaled slowly, as if he was preparing a sermon of his own. "You ever wonder how many sins $1,000,000 covers?" he asked quietly. Father M blinked. The question hung in the air, dense and absurd. He didn't answer, because he couldn't tell if it was a joke. But Diddy wasn't smiling. I did the math, he said, nodding to himself. Back in 16, right before I cut that Harlem check. New schools, free lunch programs, music academies, real money, real change. He paused, watching the flame. I figured, that's gotta wipe out 3 sins. Easy. Big ones, too. Ones that keep you up at night if you're the type to lose sleep. His voice was calm, but beneath it, there was something sharper, something surgical. Father M leaned forward. Is that how you see it? He asked, softly. A kind of accounting. Diddy looked up, locked eyes. What else is it? He replied. You people talk about grace and forgiveness like it's some mystical force. But look around, Padre. Everything costs something. Everything's a transaction. He leaned back now, more relaxed, like he had made his point and was enjoying the discomfort it caused. He continued, you ever run a label? You ever balance a budget? You ever have to decide which sin pays better silence or confession? The priest said nothing. I have, Diddy said. And let me tell you, confession don't pay. There was a pause, a long one. Then he smirked. That's why I like karma. Karma makes sense. You get what you give, not what you believe. He stood up and started pacing. His fingers traced the edge of the table like he was drawing invisible equations. There was a rhythm to him, a cadence, like he was rapping to himself in silence. I donate, I feed, I build, I show up on Christmas Eve at that Brooklyn shelter and cry in front of cameras. You know how many pastors text me after that, saying, I inspired them, saying they used my speech in their sermon. He turned back to Father M. I'm not evil. I'm generous. And for a second, he believed it. You could see it in his face. But Father M didn't look away. You don't need to buy your way out of guilt, he said, quietly. You need to walk through it. Diddy laughed. It wasn't loud, but it cut the silence cleanly. Walk through it, he echoed. You really think the world works like that? He walked over to a drawer near the wall, pulled out a glossy folder, and dropped it on the table. Inside were photocopies of checks, names of charities, photos of ribbon cuttings, and smiling children holding tablets with his logo printed in gold. Proof. He said, receipts. He tapped the folder. You think God ignores receipts? Father M felt something sink inside his chest. A weight, slow and inevitable. Diddy sat back down and picked up a coin from the table. It was solid gold, engraved with the image of a lion. He spun it slowly on its edge and watched it wobble. That's the game, Padre. Not forgiveness, optics. The priest stared at the coin, watched it lose momentum and fall flat. Diddy whispered, do you know what happens when people see you doing good? They stop looking for the bad. Another pause. That's my confession. That's all you're gonna get. His eyes weren't defiant. They were hollow. And for the first time, Father M saw what lay beneath the control. Not fear, not pain, but absence. An empty altar. This wasn't about pride. It was about power. Power to define sin. Power to price it. Power to erase it. Diddy wasn't seeking mercy. He was constructing immunity. And all Father M could think was this: the man in front of him wasn't asking whether God forgave him. He was asking whether God was even needed. because he already had the checkbook. The fourth session was different. The air was wrong. He could feel it the moment he stepped inside, thicker than usual, damp with something invisible. Not heat, not incense, weight. Father M noticed the shift immediately. The candles were already lit, but they burned lower, like they'd been going all day. Their light bent around the room, casting long shadows that didn't quite match the shapes that made them. Diddy wasn't seated like before. He stood by the far wall, staring up at something, silent. Still, his silhouette cut into the flicker of the flames, sharp as a blade. He didn't turn when the priest entered, didn't speak, just raised one hand and gestured behind him. "Look," he said. On the wall was a painting massive, framed in black iron, and it was blasphemous. Not in the obvious way. There was no blood, no gore. But it was unmistakable, a crucifixion scene. Only this time, the figure wasn't Jesus. It was a man in a tailored suit, arms outstretched, not nailed to wood, but suspended by golden chains wrapped around musical notes. His face was shadowed, but the outline, the posture was Diddy. Father M took a step back. Breath caught in his throat. Diddy turned then, slowly, calmly. And for the first time, the priest noticed his eyes glassy, almost serene. "Art is interpretation," he said. "I call it ascension." The priest didn't respond. Diddy stepped forward. "You ever think God got the story wrong?" "What story?" the priest asked, barely above a whisper. "The whole thing," Diddy said. "Creation, sin, redemption. Maybe he underestimated us." He walked over to the small table in the corner, poured himself a drink, something dark, in a cut crystal glass, and sat without offering one. "People always talk about demons, like they're metaphors," he continued. "Addiction, greed, shame. You know the list." He looked up. "I hired mine." The words were soft, almost gentle, but they landed like a knife in the room. "I don't run from darkness," Diddy said, leaning back. "I manage it, like a team, like payroll." Father M stared at him, unmoving. "You're not speaking metaphorically," he said. Diddy smiled, but his eyes didn't. "No," he said, "I don't have time for poetry." He stood again, walked toward the priest. Slowly, each step echoing over the marble tile. "I've got people men who do what needs to be done. They don't ask questions. They don't wear collars. But they serve a purpose." Then he leaned in, just slightly, voice low. "Tell me, Father, do you serve a purpose?" The question wasn't curious. It was surgical, measured, and in that instant, Father M felt it not just fear, but guilt. Had he become something else? A symbol of legitimacy. A holy shadow cast over Diddy's empire of indulgence. He had told himself he was guiding a lost man. But what if he was blessing a devil? He stepped back, shaken. Diddy didn't follow. He just raised his glass and said, almost kindly, "I like having you here. You remind me I'm still playing the game." Then he pointed to the painting. "That's not blasphemy," he said. "That's vision." Silence filled the room, the kind that gnaws at the edges of your soul. And that was when Father M knew this man didn't want salvation. He wanted Scripture rewritten in his image. The lights dimmed, but not in reverence. The spotlights hit the pulpit like a concert stage. Smoke machines hissed softly at the corners. And there he was, Diddy dressed not in humility, but in immaculate white, a diamond-studded cross glinting like a spotlight in its own right. The choir behind him swayed in perfect harmony, their robes freshly pressed, voices rising in praise that felt more rehearsed than holy. This wasn't a church service. It was a production. From New York to Atlanta, from Houston to South Central L. The pattern repeated itself. Diddy walked into sanctuaries like they were arenas. He didn't kneel. He commanded. And people rose, the congregations, many of them packed into mega churches with LED walls and million-dollar audio systems, greeted him with cheers not for his faith, but for his fame. Pastors introduced him with reverence usually reserved for prophets or presidents. A brother who gives, they'd say, a man with a heart for the people. Then came the envelopes, neatly stacked, thick with cash, handed discreetly to choir leaders, assistant pastors, sometimes even slipped into offering plates on live stream. He would stand at the pulpit, deliver his testimony always polished, always perfectly vulnerable. He spoke of struggle, of childhood pain, of redemption. I was broken once, he'd say, hand over heart. But the Lord found me. The crowd would erupt. What they didn't see, what most never questioned, was what happened after the show. In Houston, a sermon clip about sin and accountability, uploaded just days before Diddy's visit, mysteriously vanished. Quietly. No explanation. Only whispers. The following morning, church administration confirmed a generous donation had been made. $2 million? Wire transfer. Unrestricted use. A pastor rewrote his Sunday message to remove all references to judgment. We're focusing on joy this week. He smiled during service, with Diddy seated front row in sunglasses and silk. In Atlanta, a children's wing got a full renovation. New floors, new tablets, new murals. Diddy posed with local press, holding a Bible aloft with one hand, the church's branded envelope in the other. The headline read, Faith and Fortune. But Father M had seen what the rest couldn't. He had followed the paper trail, watched as Diddy used churches the same way he used record labels' platforms to amplify the brand. There was no desire to repent, only to control the narrative. Faith wasn't his refuge. It was his stage. And what was most chilling, what turned Father M's stomach, was that it worked. These churches, once homes for the weary and broken, became mirrors for a man who didn't believe in surrender, only optics. He used the aesthetics of salvation, the robe, the tears, the scripture, but not the substance. A performance so convincing that even God, watching from above, might have paused. He's so generous, people would say. He gives so much back. But the priest knew better. Diddy wasn't giving. He was investing in silence, in loyalty, in clean sermons scrubbed of sin, and maybe, worst of all, in applause. Because inside those sanctuaries, as the choirs sang louder and the lights beamed brighter, Father M realized no one was clapping for Christ. They were clapping for the man who turned belief into branding. And in the deepest part of his soul, he began to wonder, did this man ever believe in God at all? Or just in the illusion that faith could be edited like a verse in a song? It was late in 2018 when Diddy handed Father M the envelope. They were alone in the recording studio, turned sanctuary again. The lights were dimmed as always, the scent of burning drifting lazily through the air. But this night, there was no performance, no speech, just a strange stillness and something flickering behind Diddy's eyes. He stood by the drawer for a moment, fingers resting on the brass handle like he was debating whether to open it. Then he pulled it slowly, took out a sealed envelope, thick and cream-colored. It looked expensive, like something used for wedding invitations or legal documents, except it bore no name, no return address. Just a handwritten note across the front. Only if I fall. He handed it to Father M with the ease of a man giving someone a spare house key. Keep it safe, Diddy said, almost casually. If the day comes, you'll know when to open it. Father M hesitated. What is this? Diddy didn't answer. He just smiled faintly, tapped the side of his temple, and said, 5 steps ahead. The envelope wasn't opened until years later, until the courtroom, when the world finally began to see the shadows behind the spotlight. And even then, it wasn't the court that demanded it. It was Father M. He had kept it, locked away, untouched for years. But as the testimonies mounted, as the faces of the victims became harder to ignore, he knew it was time. What was inside wasn't a confession. It was a script, typed in sharp, calculated paragraphs. Each section marked and labeled with surgical clarity. Section 1, Post-Fallout Strategy. Public Statement Template. I've made mistakes, but I am still God's work, in progress. Tier point for interviews. I used to be ashamed of who I was. Now I'm just focused on who I'm becoming. Outreach calendar. Black churches. Female-led nonprofits. Mental health foundations. Prioritize East Coast Harlem. DC. Charlotte. Section 2. Image redemption. Secure interviews with forgiving figures. Tyler P. Bishop H. Ava D. Frame fall as part of spiritual journey. Announce foundation for creative youth harmed by industry exploitation. Seed fund 5 lums. Announce 10 alarm. Cue press release. We are not defined by our worst moments, but by how we rise after them. Section 3. Leverage. This part was different. A list of names, pastors, producers, politicians, each followed by vague but ominous notes. Reverend K. Bahamas Flight, July 2007. Photos in archive. Senator R. Donation via Daughters.org. IRS Match Flag 2015. Exec L. Spaghetti Night, West Wing, after 3:30 a.m. Pastor D. Request, remove sermon from channel. 2M Wired, confirm receipt. Some of the phrases made no sense. Others were crystal clear. It wasn't leverage written like blackmail. It was insurance. Quiet reminders. Silent chains. Father M's hands trembled as he flipped to the last page. It was handwritten. Diddy's unmistakable scrawl. Not careful, not clean, but confident. Let the water come. I've already built the ark. And if it floods, I choose who gets on. He read that line twice. Then a third time. It wasn't metaphor. It was doctrine. This wasn't a man hoping to survive exposure. It was a man who had planned to rise from it. And in that moment, it all snapped into place. The donations, the speeches, the pulpits, The staged tears, the quiet favors, the removed sermons, the photos, the names, the carefully timed redemptive interviews. Diddy hadn't feared the storm. He had engineered the flood, and he believed fully, unapologetically, that when it came, he'd stay dry. Father M stood in that courtroom holding the document, his voice shaking as he read those final words aloud. Gasps broke through the gallery. Reporters dropped their pens. The judge didn't move, not even a blink. Because what do you do with a man who didn't just sin, but rehearsed how to be forgiven for it before it ever happened? Father M stood at the witness stand, both hands wrapped tightly around the railing. His knuckles had turned white. His voice, until then steady, finally cracked. He didn't come to confess. He said he came to rehearse. A low murmur rippled across the courtroom, but no one dared to speak. The judge, eyes narrowed, watched him like a hawk. The stenographer's fingers paused, just for a beat, as if unsure whether they had heard him correctly. Father M inhaled, slowly. He looked out across the room, not at the jury, not at the prosecution or defense, but straight ahead, as if speaking to someone who wasn't physically there. He told me, one night, the priest said, he said, I own my salvation. The words echoed, not shouted, not embellished, just spoken. And yet, in the air of that room, they dropped like thunder. A woman in the second row gasped and covered her mouth. One of the jurors shifted in their seat, uncomfortable. The lead prosecutor stared down at their notes, as if afraid to meet anyone's gaze. I asked him what he meant. Father M continued, and he said it again. I own it. I've already paid. I've paid more than anyone you know. And if they come for me, I'm clean. He paused. That wasn't faith. That was a formula. He looked toward Diddy now, who sat silently at the defense table. No sunglasses this time. Just stillness. His jaw was tight, but his face betrayed nothing. Not anger. Not guilt. Just calculation. I thought I was guiding him. Father M said, softer now. But I see it clearly. He used me, not as a priest, as a prop. Another pause. He wanted to perfect the performance of repentance, long before anyone asked for it. And that was the moment the room turned. Not loud, not chaotic, but visceral. A sense of dread settled over the space, as if everyone suddenly realized this wasn't about a fall from grace. This was about a man who had never believed in grace to begin with. The prosecution didn't interrupt. They couldn't. The weight in the room was too heavy, the silence too complete. Then someone no one ever figured out who whispered loud enough to be caught on multiple live feeds, let the flood come. Within minutes, social media erupted. Let the flood come. Diddy article. Father M stepped back from the stand, his face pale. He had delivered testimony. But what he felt was more like a warning. And the warning was this: Diddy didn't fear the storm. He believed he'd built the boat. This wasn't about redemption. It was about winning the narrative, even as the charges piled up, even as stories surfaced. Even as the envelope's contents burned across the internet, he remained composed. Not because he was innocent, but because he'd already choreographed his fall. already selected his sound bites, already designed his resurrection. And in that courtroom, filled with law, media, and faith, only one man seemed completely prepared. The man who didn't beg for mercy, he marketed it. The city was silent in a way it had never been before. It was the spring of 2020, deep into the lockdown. Streets once alive with sirens and street vendors and late-night bass lines had gone still. Even Los Angeles, the city that never stopped performing, was quiet, uneasy. That's when Father M got the call. Diddy's voice was softer than usual. There was no arrogance, no teasing edge. Just a simple question. Can you come? For a moment, the priest hesitated. The world was collapsing outside, hospitals overflowing, funerals on Zoom, priests giving last rites through FaceTime. But something in the tone, it almost sounded like a man unraveling. He thought, maybe this was the moment. Maybe stillness had cracked through the noise. Maybe finally he wanted to be seen without a spotlight. So Father M agreed. He arrived just after dusk. The driveway was empty. No black SUVs. No security waiting at the gate. Just an open path and a single porch light blinking in the fog. He stepped inside. The house was transformed. Candles everywhere. Not dozens, hundreds. Flickering on tables, shelves, floors. The entire space glowed in amber and shadow. Dancing light licking the walls like a cathedral in ruin. Diddy was already inside, seated at the center of it all. A glass of something dark in his hand. His hair was longer now, face unshaven, eyes tired but calm. Too calm. Padre, he said, standing. You came. The priest nodded, unsure what to expect. He looked around. It feels like a vigil, he said. Diddy chuckled, low and dry. Close, he replied, but no, it's a celebration. He raised his glass to spiritual closure. Father M froze. Diddy gestured to the candlelit room. I've been alone for months, just me and my thoughts. No shows, no crowds, just silence. And you know what I heard. The priest said nothing. I heard peace. He took a slow sip, set the glass down, walked toward a large canvas propped against the wall. Unfinished. Paint still wet. It was another depiction of a crucifixion. This time, the figure's face was clearer. It was Diddy again, but this one smiled. I made my peace. He said, signed the last deal, funded the last foundation, donated enough to keep my name on the walls of 4 churches across 3 states. You think God still needs a written apology after that? Father M stepped forward, heart sinking. You invited me here to confess, he asked. Diddy turned, calm, certain. No, he said, I invited you here to bless it. The silence thickened. I never asked you to save me. Diddy continued, you were never meant to. You were meant to validate me. He looked directly into the priest's eyes. You're the final stamp, Father. Then he said it, gently. You weren't chosen to pull me from the fire. You were chosen to sprinkle holy water over the ashes. Father M felt his chest tighten. Something inside him broke. Quietly, he tried to speak, tried to plead, but the words wouldn't come. Not because he didn't have them, but because he knew. Diddy had already decided. He didn't want redemption. He wanted recognition. He wanted God to sign off on his legacy. And when the priest turned to leave, Diddy raised his glass one more time to sins paid in full. Father M stood still at the edge of the witness box, the courtroom lights casting long shadows down his robe. His face was older now, not just in years, but in weight. His eyes didn't look at Diddy anymore. They didn't need to. They were turned toward the jury, 12 strangers, clutching their notepads, their pens stilled, their breath held in the brittle hush that follows something unspeakable. And then the priest spoke quietly, but with no hesitation. I didn't leave because I hated him. He said, I left because I was afraid of what I was becoming beside him. His voice didn't shake. Not this time. I stayed too long. He continued. I kept telling myself I was doing God's work, that if I left, he'd spiral, that I was the only thread of grace in his life. He looked down, just for a moment. But that wasn't the truth. He inhaled, held it, then exhaled slowly, like releasing something he'd carried for far too long. I stayed because I was seduced by proximity, because being needed, even by someone as broken as him, gave me purpose. And I forgot what I was supposed to stand for. His gaze lifted again, this time firmer. You think you're here to judge a man, he said to the jurors, but you're not. A pause. You could hear the courtroom settle into its chairs. You're judging the silence that made room for him, the system that let money disguise morality, the churches that traded pulpits for donations, the people like me who stood too close to power and called it ministry. He let the words hang there. Then, softer, but deeper. This trial isn't the end of anything. It's not a closing chapter. It's a mirror. He turned, slowly, toward the gallery, toward the cameras, the reporters, the nation. Because what he built wasn't just a lie. He said it was a blueprint. And there are others watching, learning, waiting. He stepped back. And if we walk out of here thinking this was only about one man, he stopped, eyes scanning the room one last time. Then we've already lost. And just like that, the priest left the stand. The judge called for a recess. But no one moved. The courtroom emptied slowly, like a theater after a tragedy no one was ready for. Chairs creaked, papers rustled, cameras blinked red, but held their silence. And yet, something heavier than words remained in the air, an ache. Not just about Diddy, but about everything he represented. Outside, protesters shouted, supporters whispered, commentators filled studio rooms with noise and speculation. But inside, in the space that once held his secrets, a single question lingered like incense. Who owned salvation? Was it the man who donated millions while masking his sins? Was it the priest who stayed too long in the shadows of power? Was it the system that mistook wealth for worthiness? Or was it no one or everyone? The truth was brutal in its simplicity. Diddy never sought forgiveness. He engineered acceptance. He rehearsed redemption like a script, memorized grace like a PR quote, and believed with every ounce of his fame that he could bypass the divine with perfect branding. And perhaps what frightened us most was how close he came. There's a part of us, if we're honest, that understands his logic, that thinks maybe, just maybe, enough good deeds can outweigh the darkness. That if we give enough, we can rewrite the story. But salvation was never built on math, or money, or performance. It was built on surrender. And that's the one thing he never offered. So now the question is yours. Do you believe redemption can be bought, or must it be earned? Through truth, through humility, through change. Tell us what you think. Comment below. And if you want to know what happened next, what's still unfolding, make sure you're here for the next chapter. Because the fall of an empire doesn't end when the gavel drops. Sometimes it's only just begun. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a man named Diddy. It was about how far someone can go, not to hide their sins, but to rebrand them. How power, fame, and fortune can blur the line between repentance and performance. And how sometimes the most dangerous belief is not that you're beyond saving, but that you never needed to be saved at all. Father M walked away, not in anger, but in quiet fear. Fear that he, too, had been part of something larger than one man, a machine, a mirror, a myth. And maybe that's what lingers long after the court is dismissed, after the hashtags fade, after the headlines move on. Not the question of guilt, but the question of what we choose to forgive and why. Because if salvation becomes a currency, who decides the price? Maybe we all do. So if this story moved you or unsettled you, sit with that. Share it. Talk about it. Because sometimes the only thing more powerful than confession is conversation. And if you're still wondering how this ends, you're not alone. We're still writing it together. Let the flood come. But don't forget who's building the ark.